So this is what this is called TSL, throat seal liquid. A lot of guys think it's an oil, but really what it's doing is it's preventing any overspray from sticking to the top of that rod. So as the rod goes back into the packings, there's no abrasion. So this is basically just every use, 2 squirts. It'll keep the top of the rod wet. It'll prevent paint or dirt from drying on there. So just 2 squirts. And then there's a little reservoir for it to sit in, but as the rod goes back down, it'll wipe it clean, prevent any paint in the air from drying on it. That way, it's just going to make those packings last longer for you. So, plain and simple. This is a good example of what I wanted to show is, sometimes if it sits real long in water, that blower ball can stick on you. So a little trick there is if when you go to prime, if it doesn't prime within like 30 seconds, that ball might be stuck. So what you want, the key is to hit the bottom, because the ball sits here. So I'll see a lot of pumps and they're all scarred up here because guys are banging up there with a hammer. But that lower ball is actually right there. And a lot of times just that vibration is enough to free it up. If not, the next step is just to take off the inlet tube. So if it doesn't prime within like a minute, don't just let it keep running, because eventually you'll melt those packets. You have the piston going through them, you're creating heat. If there's no liquid in there, those packets will melt. So like I say, if within about a minute, if you can't get it to prime, then we want to go ahead and check that ball. So there's 2 ways. You could just take the tube off. So I'm going to loosen up this nut. Actually, this whole foot valve is a little loose, so we'll do both. But basically, the first step would be, in this case, the foot valve wants to come off. So if you could just, thank you, Lou. So we're going to take so first thing you want to make sure is the pressure's back down. Go ahead, pop off the foot valve. And then what we would be checking just to see if there's any debris stuck in there. So we could just take it, just bang it down, and this is nice and free. But what you're looking in here is the seat, the ball, and the retainer or the cage. The seat is the same on both sides, so what you want to look at is the very inside diameter. If you have any chips or scrapes, flip it. You want the good side up, because any chips in that inside diameter will allow pressure to leak back out. Same thing with the ball. The ball over time may get some little nicks in it. So, but if it just won't prime, usually it's stuck. You got the ball, it sits in that seat, the water evaporates, and that ball gets stuck. Sometimes the vibration is enough, sometimes it's not. But usually just taking it apart like this will solve the problem. Good side up, ball on. We'll go ahead and put if this was tight, which I am going to snug it back hammer tight, because if we run it too long with the foot valve loose, there's an O-ring here that if this is loose and you run it too long, that will actually cut the O-ring and it'll start to leak. It'll start to leak out there. So we want to make sure when we put this back on, it's tight. So
neoprene.
Yes. So seat down, ball, retainer. While we have it here, it's more rare that the top ball will stick, but since I already have this apart, it's worth checking. But the upper ball is inside that piston, so a couple pushes and you'll actually hear, you just want to hear that ball moving, which I did. So then I know it's free. If that ball was stuck, usually when we push this up in there, you would hear a little pop and you would get some liquid draining out. Because what was happening is, as the pump was going up and down, that ball wasn't moving, so it actually built some pressure inside that piston. Pushing the ball up will release that pressure. So that's what we just want to, since it's already apart, 9 times out of 10 it would be that lower ball, but since we're already in there, check the top ball. As long as those two are moving, then we should prime right up. So I'm going to go ahead and put the foot valve back on. Once it's down, go ahead and give it a shot with that mallet. taken just the tube off, stuck my pinky in there and tried to pop the ball open if need be. We're good?
How would you store them?
So short term, like I'm painting today, I'm painting tomorrow, you can leave the water in. Anything more than like a couple days, the pump armor. Because that's a glycol, keeps it lubricated, prevents that ball from sticking. So if every time you go use this, the ball's stuck, probably means we need to clean it a little more. This will also work as an antifreeze in the wintertime, so we gotta watch it this time of year. Great, so we can put that back down, and then we check our prime again. Once I have a prime, so the way I like to do is trigger the gun first. That way you don't get a big blast of pressure. Then switch it up to spray. We're keeping the pressure low. But this way, because I triggered the gun first before I switched to the spray, I didn't get that big burst of pressure. If anybody hasn't sprayed before, if you're in prime, and then you switch it up to spray, you get sidetracked, you go too long. Now if I trigger that gun, if that's in the paint, I'm going to end up with a face full of paint. So that's why I always trigger the gun before I go to spray. Now if I do reach the point where, how do I get rid of the pressure now? Just shut it off, turn the pressure all the way down or shut it off. I always hold this hose and then down the prime. As soon as you turn it to prime, that gets the pressure off the system. So if you ever have a problem, if that hose was leaking, with any problem, first thing we do is get rid of the pressure, then we can address the problem. That way we're not, the pressure is obviously a safety concern. I'll talk about that in a second. But anytime you want to go ahead and relieve the pressure, off, down the prime. If you forget to turn it off first, not the end of the world. But the key is getting it to that prime position because that's going to recycle the paint and the pressure is going to get off the line and the gun. Before we go to paint, let's just go ahead and do that filter so everyone knows. So on your regular airless gun, your filter's in the handle here. Now I'm gonna remove the handle, but whenever I do anything, always just go down the prime first, just to make sure there's no pressure on the pump.
You can take that handle off without taking all the pieces apart.
That's why we like those Graco guns. They're a little easier. So yeah, that's this should be cleaned every use.
We're gonna backtrack.
Yep. So that obviously hasn't been cleaned every use. So what happens is, that plugs up. Now all of a sudden you have to use a lot more pressure to get it through the pump filter. Part of your daily cleanup is just give that a quick clean. These actually filter from the inside out. So that's why this little brush comes with the gun. So you can go ahead and clean the inside of that filter. But a quick run under the water, that'll clean up good as new, and you won't have to run your pump pressure so high, and your filters will last longer. So that's a regular gun. On the air-assisted gun, the filter is a little different because we're generally using smaller tips, so it's a smaller mesh filter. Gun just goes back hand tight. Put your trigger guard on, you're good to go. This one's a little trickier. You do need to use the wrenches because that filter sits right here. So what we need to do, same thing, just make sure you're in prime before you go to loosen any hose. We actually have to remove the hose. Hose comes off. And then the filter housing actually comes out of the gun.
I'm sure that was probably dirty. Cut out.
Actually, you could say, well, that was probably from what you could see though, even if that's new.
We just sprayed the stairwell.
So that's a super fine filter because we're using 08, 12 tips. We're using such small tips that needs to be real fine. So that's your gun filter, and then your pump filter. This is the same as. So that's usually hand tight. Once again, always make sure the pressure's off before we use the wrench. And this this is the same style we use on all our pumps. That's pretty clean. We got a little in there, that red. But this is on this pump we use 100 mesh. On the regular airless we use a 60 mesh, a thicker mesh, because once again we're using smaller tips on here, so we want to use the finer mesh filter. That water starts flowing through the hose.
Yeah.
The paint kind of pushes up against the inside of the hose.
Yeah, I hear.
But if you give it that chance to relax, the paint will come back in and it'll clean it out a little bit more.
No,
All right, so this filter is back. If you're ever in a case, you need this filter in there because this acts as a O-ring. If you had a heavier material, you could actually unscrew the filter element, but you still need to get the black piece back in there because that's gonna seal it off. So that pops in.
I didn't even know it was built in there.
I didn't either.
No, I mean
I just found out.
it's pretty sturdy, but once again, the more you clean it, the less you replace it. That's the general rule.
Gerard, do you recommend using like M1?
So this is the same startup you would use for a regular airless. We're not going to run the air. We're going to start in the prime position. If I was working out of a 5, like flat paint, I'd probably run that water right back into the 5. But being that we're working out of a single and we're talking about a high finish grade paint here, we'll make sure all the water gets out into the bucket first. So I'm on. See my color there. Same thing now with the gun. I'm going to trigger it first. Up the spray. Get all the water out of the line. Once I get color, I'll shoot that back in the paint for 10, just so I have good solid paint. Once I have good solid paint, we'll go ahead and put the tip on. So when I go to put the tip on, I'll make sure that once again the pressure is off. So as with any tip, you have the seal, which is it's actually 2 pieces. You have the rubber seal and the metal. So the rubber goes behind the metal.
Lou, what are you looking for? We got it. Okay.
And then you have a little nub on the end of the tip. That just helps you put the seal into the guard. You want to line up the crescent of the seal with the hole in the guard. So we just pop this in. And then I'll push it down flush with my finger. And that's going to allow me to get the tip in the guard. If you can't get the tip all the way in, that means that seal's probably a little crooked. We're going to have to readjust it. So your number one safety feature with any airless sprayer, where it's air assisted, regular airless, is the injection hazard. You know, we're dealing with anywhere from 500 to 3,000 PSI here going through that tiny little tip, which if I was to put my finger here, thank you, and trigger the gun, I would inject myself with paint, which whether it's paint, dirty water, it doesn't really matter. You put a foreign matter into your bloodstream. If that happens, and that's what all these warning labels tell you, is you have to go immediately to the hospital and they're going to cut you open and get out whatever you got in there, suck it out, or else that material starts traveling up your arm to the point where they may have to cut things off, or if it reaches your heart, it can kill you. So it's a serious injury, and the whole point is we want to prevent that. That's what the guard is for. That's supposed to be enough of a distance that the pattern has already started to fan out that it won't inject you. I've never personally tested this distance, so anytime I'm working around the front of the gun, I always want to make sure that we're in prime, the pressure is off, I don't have to worry about it. So tip goes on. You do wire this nice and snug. I prefer to have the tip to my left. All the airless, all these green, any tip with a handle is a reversible tip. So occasionally, even though you have the filter in the gun, the filter in the pump, you still could occasionally get a tip clog. So you're spraying along, all of a sudden you have no paint. Basically means your tip clogged, so you just turn the tip, trigger the gun.
You
That
like
blows.
spraying that way, or like with the tip that way?
I like it this way, so I
know
can
some people that
yeah,
have the tip this
it's
way.
really just preference.
I like it, yeah.
But like I said, the first thing I did was dump the pressure. So we're back up to spray. We're gonna go roughly 1,000. What I was on my way over to do is once you've drained the water out of the pump, put this in your paint so that when we do dump the pressure, it dumps into your paint bucket, not into your dump bucket. So you're saving paint, obviously. So we're roughly at 1,000 psi, no air, because I want to. And even at 1,000, that's looking pretty good. I'm not getting the heavy tail, so I want to lower that just a little bit so you can see. Yeah, and the air usually between 20 and 25. But I want to purposely get a tail, just. So, even there.
Not really.
Paint's good. I probably wouldn't go lower than 500. So that's 500 now. Just enough air, just to help me fan out a little bit. Because that also takes care of the stick.
We're doing a spray demo in the shop here and just demonstrating to the rest of the crew how important it is to keep a steady hand from the surface we're spraying. It's important to keep the same distance and not to wave the gun out left to right or up or down. When you're doing fine finish spraying, it's really important for an even finish to be sprayed along.